In 1887, on the muddy waters of the Opobo River, a West African king stepped aboard a British vessel to discuss trade. Jaja of Opobo had built one of the most powerful commercial states in the Niger Delta, and the British wanted what moved through his canoes, markets, and inland networks. The dispute was not over diamonds, petroleum, or gold. The oil wells that would later make the Delta famous had not yet transformed the region. The commodity was palm oil, a thick red fat pressed from the fruit of a tree. Jaja had once been enslaved. He had risen through the trading houses of Bonny, founded the kingdom of Opobo, and gained enough control over the palm oil routes to influence prices and keep European merchants from bypassing African middlemen. To British officials, this was not simply difficult business, it was an obstacle to imperial expansion. After the meeting, Jaja was detained, tried far from his kingdom, and exiled to the Caribbean. A ruler had been removed because he controlled an oil that most people today barely notice. That is the central mystery of palm oil. In West African cooking, it can be brilliant red, fragrant, and impossible to miss. In the modern supermarket, it has been refined until its color and character disappear. It may sit inside a biscuit, a chocolate coating, instant noodles, margarine, soap, shampoo, detergent, lipstick, or fuel, doing its work without announcing itself. One of the most visible fats in African food became one of the most invisible ingredients in global industry. Its history connects ancient kitchens to slave trading ports, British factories to Belgian colonial concessions, botanical gardens to Southeast Asian plantations, and cheap snacks to burning peatlands. Palm oil did not merely travel around the world, it changed form each time power touched it. A local food became an industrial raw material. An industrial raw material became a plantation crop. A plantation crop became an ingredient so useful that modern manufacturers built it into everyday life. If you like stories where ordinary food turns into empire, trade, obsession, and hidden history, subscribe to Food Empire History. Now, to understand how palm oil became this powerful, we have to go back to where the story really begins. The African oil palm, Elias guinensis, is native to tropical Africa. It thrives in humid landscapes where forest, river, farm, and settlement meet. A mature palm sends long fronds into the heat and produces heavy bunches packed with reddish fruit. Cutting them demands strength, balance, and a sharp blade. When a bunch strikes the earth, loose fruits scatter like polished red stones. Each fruit contains two oils. The fleshy outer layer holds palm oil, naturally orange or red because of carotenoid pigments. Inside the hard shell, the kernel produces a paler oil with different properties. Long before industrial chemistry, African communities treated the tree as a complete resource. Fruit became food, sap became palm wine, and fibers, leaves, shells, and wood served households and farms. Archaeological remains show that oil palm fruit and kernels were part of life in West and Central Africa roughly 5,000 years ago. That evidence does not point to a single inventor or one dramatic moment of domestication. It points to a long relationship between people and palms, shaped by clearing, protecting useful trees, encouraging groves, carrying fruit, selecting productive plants, and learning how to release oil from stubborn flesh. The transformation was laborious. Fresh fruit had to be processed before it spoiled. In many communities, men cut the bunches while women performed much of the skilled work that turned fruit into oil, although labor patterns varied. Fruit was boiled, pounded, washed, squeezed, skimmed, and heated again. Smoke hung above fires as bright oil rose through cloudy water. This was not primitive work waiting for a European machine, it was a body of knowledge. Producers judged ripeness, controlled heat and water, made oil for cooking or travel, and stored kernels for later cracking. The process was slow because the fruit demanded attention, but it created a fat dense with calories, flavor, color, and meaning. Red palm oil entered soups, stews, sauces, and porridges, making food rich enough for celebration and practical enough for survival. Palms also appeared in medicine and ritual, while their products moved through markets. A grove could represent years of labor, inherited knowledge, and future food. That local meaning matters because the global history often begins by treating the palm as raw material. It was never merely raw material. Before Europe wanted it for factories, African societies had already made it valuable through cuisine, commerce, agriculture, and culture. The empire story began only after outsiders learned that the same oil which enriched a pot could also feed a machine. European merchants encountered palm products along the West African coast centuries before the industrial boom. Portuguese traders reached the Kingdom of Benin in the late 15th century and exchanged metal goods, including manillas, for regional products such as pepper, ivory, cloth, and palm oil. The quantities were limited compared with what came later, but the pattern was already visible. Europeans did not discover the oil palm. They entered existing African systems and began attaching foreign prices to them. Then the Atlantic slave trade distorted the entire region. From the 17th into the 18th century, palm oil circulated through the same coastal world that supplied captive people to European ships. It was used locally and could also help provision trading centers, voyages, and the people trapped inside the slave economy. Palm oil and slavery were not separate histories. They occupied the same ports, rivers, merchant networks, and political systems. When Britain abolished its transatlantic slave trade in 1807, merchants and officials promoted exports such as palm oil as part of what they called legitimate commerce. The phrase sounded clean. The reality was not. Slave trading did not vanish in a year. Slavery continued within African and colonial economies, and old commercial elites did not simply disappear. In some regions, palm oil offered an alternative export. In others, it grew beside systems of coercion and inherited violence. The Industrial Revolution changed Europe's appetite. Factories needed fats, palm oil burned in lamps, became candles and soap, and lubricated machinery. Before mineral oils and synthetic chemicals dominated industry, barrels of vegetable and animal fat helped keep metal moving and consumer goods affordable. African brokers connected inland producers to European ships. Canoes carried containers through creeks where ocean water mixed with river mud. Trading houses extended credit, controlled routes, and gathered oil from many producers. A buyer in Liverpool saw a barrel. Behind it stood climbers, processors, paddlers, porters, merchants, and communities. The Niger Delta became one of the great palm oil zones of the 19th century. Its waterways favored African trading states that understood the interior better than foreign merchants did. Europeans waited near the coast while powerful brokers moved upriver. That arrangement gave men like Jaja room to rise. Born in the early 1820s and carried into the Delta through domestic slavery as a child, he became a gifted organizer inside Bonny's canoe house system. When conflict divided Bonny, Jaja led his followers to establish Opobo in the early 1870s. From the New Kingdom, he controlled access to productive hinterland markets and sold palm oil to British buyers on terms he worked to defend. His power came from the point where geography met commerce. European ships needed the oil, but they could not simply sail into every creek, command every producer, or erase every African institution. British merchants wanted direct access. Jaja wanted to preserve the system that made Opobo powerful. The disagreement became political because empire rarely separated trade from control. In 1887, he was removed and exiled. The trade continued, but the lesson was clear. When an African ruler controlled a valuable commodity, free trade could arrive behind a gunboat. By the end of the 19th century, palm oil was pouring into European ports. Barrels were unloaded beside warehouses blackened by coal smoke. Soap factories consumed enormous quantities of fat and alkali. Advertising transformed cleanliness from a household task into a branded modern ideal. A bar of soap could now carry a name, a wrapper, a promise, and the reach of an empire. Few understood that better than William Lever. Lever Brothers built its success around branded soap, especially Sunlight, made near Liverpool. The company sold cleanliness as progress. Yet its products depended on oils grown and processed far beyond Britain. Buying palm oil through African markets left manufacturers exposed to price changes, competition, and producers they did not fully control. Lever wanted a steadier supply. He sought land where a company could influence the trees, the workers, the mills, the transport, and the final cost. That desire pulled the soap business deeper into colonialism. In 1911, Lever Brothers established Huileries du Congo Belge after reaching an agreement with the Belgian colonial government. The company gained privileged access to palm oil across large areas of the Belgian Congo. The colony had only recently passed from the personal rule of King Leopold II to the Belgian state after international outrage over mass violence and exploitation. Officials spoke of reform and development. The new concessions still rested on a colonial system that treated African land and labor as resources to be organized from above. In 1912, the first bar of soap made from Congolese palm oil was presented to King Albert I of Belgium. It was a small ceremonial object carrying an enormous contradiction. In Europe, the soap represented cleanliness. In the Congo, the system supplying its oil involved coercion, quotas, punishment, child labor, mistreatment, and forms of forced or unfree labor documented in colonial and company records. Lever Brothers described its mission in paternal language, presenting company towns, housing, and employment as improvement. Yet later, archival research found that senior figures knew about serious worker mistreatment and responded inadequately. The clean surface of the branded product concealed a labor system consumers would never see. This was palm oil's first great act of disappearance. Its color could be removed, its origin could be hidden behind a wrapper, its human cost could be buried beneath a story about modern hygiene. The people who bought the soap did not need to know where the fruit grew, who cut it, or what happened when a worker failed to meet a demand. The brand carried the pleasure, the colony carried the pressure, but the future of industrial palm oil would not remain in Africa. The decisive relocation had begun decades earlier inside a colonial botanical garden on Java. In 1848, a small group of African oil palms arrived at Buitenzorg, now Bogor. At first they were botanical specimens, part of an imperial network that moved plants around the world to test their commercial potential. Botanical gardens were laboratories of empire. Seeds, reports, and scientists traveled between colonies, searching for crops that could be grown in new territories. Rubber, tea, quinine, coffee, and oil palm moved through systems where botany served commerce, detaching plants from the societies that had developed their original uses. For years, oil palms in Southeast Asia were often ornamental or experimental. Then investors recognized that the region's humid climate could support large estates. Commercial planting began in Sumatra around 1911 and in Malaya in 1917. The popular story celebrates adventurous planters and superior science. The deeper history is more structural. Colonial governments made land available, enforced claims that favored plantations, built transport, and supplied labor systems that companies could command. On Sumatra, estates drew on migrant and indentured workers, including laborers from Java and China. Forests and lands used under customary systems could be classified as empty or underused when they did not match European ideas of ownership. Rows of palms replaced more complex landscapes. A crop that had grown for centuries within African farms groves and mixed environments was redesigned as a plantation geometry. The Southeast Asian system also solved an industrial problem. Palm fruit begins changing soon after harvest, especially when bruised. Enzymes release free fatty acids and reduce the quality of the oil. That means ripe bunches must move quickly from tree to mill. Roads, rails, trucks, labor schedules, and processing machinery became part of the crop itself. The plantation was not simply a field, it was a timed machine. At the mill, steam sterilized the bunches and loosened the fruit. Threshers separated fruit from stalk, digesters crushed the flesh, and presses forced out oil, water, and solids. Clarification and refining removed impurities, pigments, odors, and flavors. The vivid red oil became pale, neutral, and standardized. Chemistry made it even more adaptable. Palm oil could be separated into a liquid fraction, often used for frying, and a harder fraction useful in shortenings, bakery fats, spreads, and coatings. Palm kernel oil supplied another set of textures and melting properties. One fruit bunch entered the mill. Multiple industrial ingredients came out. This versatility helped Southeast Asia overtake Africa as the leading export region by the late 1930s. War disrupted plantations, but the system survived. After independence, Malaysia and Indonesia expanded oil palm on a far greater scale. Governments saw export revenue, rural development, and an alternative to older plantation crops. Large estates grew, but so did networks of smallholders whose incomes became tied to mills, traders, credit, and global prices. The crop was astonishingly productive. Compared with other major oil crops, oil palm can produce far more oil from the same land, bears fruit throughout the year, and supplies both palm and kernel oil. For manufacturers, it meant volume. For governments, export earnings, and for many farmers, a dependable cash crop. Then food technology gave palm oil its second great opportunity. During the 20th century, manufacturers wanted fats that stayed stable, resisted oxidation, survived transport, and created predictable textures. They needed biscuits that remained crisp, fillings that did not leak, noodles that fried consistently, margarine that spread, and coatings that melted at the right moment. Palm oil could be refined until almost flavorless, then blended and fractionated for each job. Its physical structure was especially useful. Unlike many liquid vegetable oils, palm oil contains enough saturated fat to be naturally semi-solid under common room conditions. Manufacturers could create firmness without relying as heavily on partial hydrogenation, the process that produced industrial trans fats. As concern and regulation pushed trans fats out of foods, palm-based fats became an attractive replacement in many products. The machine separated palm oil from any single cuisine. In West Africa, the oil announced itself through color and flavor. In a global factory, it became texture, shelf life, foam, gloss, creaminess, or frying performance. Consumers could eat it without tasting palm fruit and wash with it without recognizing an agricultural commodity. Today, Indonesia supplies roughly half of the global market, with Malaysia remaining another major producer. Tankers and container systems move refined oil and specialized fractions through an enormous network of traders, refiners, food companies, cosmetic manufacturers, chemical plants, and fuel programs. Global oil palm fruit production rose sharply between 2010 and 2024, driven not only by higher yields but also by expansion of harvested land. The supply chain is not made only of corporations. Millions depend on oil palm, including smallholders, mill workers, transporters, and rural businesses. In parts of Indonesia and Malaysia, the crop has paid school fees, financed homes, and connected isolated regions to cash economies. Any honest history must include that benefit. But dependence also creates vulnerability. Smallholders may have little bargaining power. limited access to certified seedlings, old trees with falling yields, or debts tied to a crop that cannot be processed without a nearby mill. Workers can face high quotas, dangerous tools, chemical exposure, insecure contracts, and remote living conditions. International labor authorities continue to report risks of child labor and forced labor in parts of the supply chain. The environmental cost is even more visible from the air. In Indonesia and Malaysia, plantation expansion has replaced tropical forest and other species-rich habitats. Roads cut into landscapes. Drainage canals lower the water table in peatlands that stored carbon over thousands of years. When drained peat burns, fire can travel underground, releasing smoke that crosses cities and borders. Orangutans became the symbol of this destruction, but they are not the only species affected. Tigers, gibbons, elephants, birds, insects, and plants lose habitat when diverse forest becomes a single commercial crop. The International Union for Conservation of Nature has linked palm oil production to impacts on at least 193 threatened species. The problem is not that a palm tree is biologically evil. The problem is what disappears when plantations are placed where forests, peatlands, and communities already exist. That distinction is essential because a simple boycott creates another problem. The world still demands enormous quantities of vegetable oil. Replacing palm oil entirely with lower-yielding crops such as soy, sunflower, or rapeseed could require much more land. Moving the label from one oil to another does not automatically protect nature. It may only move the damage. The real question is whether existing plantations can produce more without clearing forest, whether degraded land can be restored, whether workers and indigenous communities can enforce their rights, and whether every shipment can be traced to the farm. Those questions have produced certification, satellite monitoring, and new laws. The Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil was formed in 2004 to create environmental and social standards for the industry. Certified production has grown, although certification is not a guarantee that every problem has vanished. Monitoring remains difficult, especially where fruit from many small farms enters the same mill. Rules are only as strong as the audits, enforcement, transparency, and consequences behind them. Europe is also preparing to require companies trading products linked to commodities such as palm oil to show that they are not connected to recent deforestation. The policy turns a supermarket ingredient into a mapping problem. A company must know not merely which refinery sold the oil, but where the palm stood. After centuries of palm oil becoming invisible, the modern struggle is about forcing the supply chain to become visible again. There is another layer. Palm oil is high in saturated fat, and replacing saturated fats with more unsaturated oils can benefit cardiovascular health. Yet palm oil in a heavily processed snack belongs to a different dietary pattern from red palm oil used in a traditional meal. Chemistry matters, but so do quantity, processing, and context. That is why palm oil resists simple villains and simple heroes. It is an African food with ancient roots, a crop that supports livelihoods, an industrial fat with remarkable efficiency, and a commodity repeatedly tied to colonial control, labor abuse, deforestation, and hidden consumption. Every version is true, but none is complete by itself. Return to the Opobo River in 1887. The British understood that controlling trade meant controlling power. Jaja understood it too. His exile was not caused by palm oil alone, but the commodity sat at the center of the struggle between African commercial sovereignty and an expanding empire. Decades later, Lever brothers pursued the same logic in another form. Control the land, the labor, the mill, and the oil, and you control the price. Then the plantation system carried that logic across the Indian Ocean. Colonial botany moved the tree. Industrial machinery removed its color. Food science divided it into fractions. Advertising removed its history. The result is an ingredient that can be everywhere precisely because it appears to be nowhere. The next time you hold a biscuit, a packet of instant noodles, a jar of spread, or a bar of soap, turn it over. You may find palm oil written plainly on the label. You may find palm fat, palm kernel oil, or a derivative whose name no longer resembles a fruit at all. Behind those words is a tree from tropical Africa, a red oil shaped by generations of knowledge, and a global system built by ships, colonies, factories, plantations, and laboratories. The label cannot show the whole story. It cannot show women skimming red oil from boiling water, canoes moving through the Niger Delta, Jaja facing British power, workers cutting fruit in the Congo, botanists tending imported palms in Java, steam rolling through a mill, or smoke drifting above drained peat. Yet all of those histories are present in the product. Palm oil's greatest transformation was not from fruit to fat. It was from something visible to something hidden. Once, its red color declared where it came from. Today, its usefulness allows it to disappear into the texture of modern life. The history remains even when the color is gone. If this story changed the way you see palm oil, subscribe for more hidden food history.